Now that I have everything rendered, there are a few things I want to mention before we continue on to the compositing. So I want to show you how I chain things in order to be able to render everything in one go. Okay, so we have these four, which are camera one, and then they connect to these four, camera two, and these four, camera three. One issue that I noticed on the Sparks was that we did get a warning, and I mentioned that we can't really calculate proper motion blur because when it tries to interpolate from one frame to the other, the topology is changing, meaning the point number is changing, the vertex number is changing, so it can't really interpolate properly the motion blur. The solution for the issues that this was bringing up, because these were issues that were not visible if you were rendering with the render view, but once I was pressing render to disk, this was becoming a problem. I had some huge streaks on some of the frames. And the solution for this was pretty simple. We do want to render with motion blur, and this could actually be on. It's fine. What you needed to make sure is that the RNDR Sparks object didn't have the motion blur on. So you would go to the redshift parameters render, and then you would see here enable transformation, motion blur, mesh deformation, motion blur, and instance particles motion blur. So these should all be turned off. The robot will still have motion blur, but the sparks won't, and that will get rid of all the issues. So that's pretty much it. Everything else went pretty smoothly, and it actually rendered pretty fast. So now that we have everything rendered, and let's go into compositing. The software that I'm going to be using for compositing is called Natron. It's pretty much very similar to Nuke. It's a completely free software, open source, and I highly recommend it for those of you who only delve in compositing occasionally, like myself. It has all the essential nodes that you would use most often for compositing your renders. So it's really cool. Um, highly recommend that you not only use it but that you also support it if you can. It's really an amazing tool, and it's amazing to have it for free. So let's get to it. One side note, of course, is you can definitely do the same thing in Nuke. You can composite this in Fusion. You can do it in After Effects. Just choose one that you're familiar with and go with that. I'm here on the node graph. We have our viewer. This is what's being displayed. So I'm just going to press R to create a read node. It's going to immediately pop up a menu or a window for me to select the sequence that I'm going to be using. And I'm going to grab the Beauty Robot Cam 1 and I'm going to open that one. I'm going to press number 1 on the keyboard so it connects to the viewer, and now we can see the render. At this time, it's also important to remind everyone to recall that Redshift is using ACCG by default, which is awesome. So we need just to keep that in mind when we're doing the compositing and making sure we're always on the proper color space and visualizing with a proper color transform. Regarding your read nodes, when you import it in Natron, the file color space and the output color space, you can leave it as is. The transform that we want to look at is definitely sRGB. But if you compare this to a render from Houdini with Redshift, you'll notice that it doesn't give us the same look. Let me minimize this and see if I can put them side by side so you can see what I mean. So let's go back to Natron. And you can clearly see that the yellows and the reds, a lot more saturation and contrast here. This seems a bit washed off. So the way you can take care of this is actually, we're going to go into Natron and switch this to linear. This is not the look, of course, and hit tab, and you can create an OCIO color space. When you connect this here, before you visualize it, we're going to say that the input color space is going to be ACCG and the output color space is going to be output sRGB. So now when you compare it, you'll see that these match pretty well. Okay, so that's the only thing you need to do. Create an OCIO color space and configure it in order to make sense of what we are actually doing. We want the input color space to be ACCG, the output should be sRGB, and we don't need the transform to be applied on the viewer, so we switch this to linear so we don't have a double correction on the sRGB. So we have our main render of the robot. I'm gonna switch this to another frame and we'll be loading in the other elements for the sequence. So I'm gonna press R again and I'm gonna go up. And the first thing we want to add is the reflection of the blast. So let's go to the tech blast reflection, cam 1, and let's bring this one up. As you can see, this is how it looks. Of course, it's not being transformed, so it looks darker than before, but don't worry about it. If we connect it here, for instance, you'll see it, you should see it properly. Okay, this is what we were getting before. So I'll press M to create a merge node. B goes to the background, A goes to the foreground layer that I'm adding. And we want to add one thing on top of the other. So let's make sure that the operation on the merge is plus. Okay. One thing you should remember that we aren't actually interested on the render. If we connect this to the viewer, I'm pressing 2 to connect it to the input 2. You will have here all the available channels. And in this case, what we're interested in is the reflection. So I'll create a shuffle. I'll create a shuffle node. Click and drag and hit Control to connect it here. And I want to grab the reflection pass. So he automatically populates these with the reflection RGB. And now we will have a difference between this one and this one. Okay. And this is what we actually want to add to our, we're adding that extra reflection of the particles that we didn't have before. Okay, so now that we have that, let's move on to another layer. I'm going to press R. And the next thing that we're going to be loading is the sparks. So this is the sparks render. I'm going to combine this with what we already have. Hit M again, place it here. So if you want to switch the inputs, right now it connected the A and left the B. So I'm going to hit Shift X so it switches. So now the background is coming from there and I'm going to be adding the foreground. And this is going to be also as a plus. It's not 100% accurate, but it's good enough. Let me put this there. One thing that I also want from this render pass is the emission. So I'm going to create another shuffle. On this shuffle, I'm going to connect it either A or B is fine. And I'm going to make sure to select the emission. If we look at this, we only see the sparks. And I want to add a bit more power to the sparks here. You can add it directly after you merge in this pass. We can create another merge. Is it here? Again, I'll hit Shift X to switch the connections. And I'll add a here. And this is going to be a plus as well. Now, if we look at this and I click D on and off to turn this merge on and off, you'll see that there's a difference on the intensity of the sparks. And let's put this at 50% so we can see it a bit better. D to turn on and off. So it's a bit stronger. And I'll keep this. Still making some more room. We still have another pass to go. So I'll hit R again. And on this one, we're going to be grabbing the blast. So I'll hit M, create another merge with Control pressed. Holding Control up, make sure this connects, and Shift X to switch. This will be merged as over. So if you look at it, you'll see that we have this with everything combined and with the proper color transformation. We have this here. Let me make sure to turn off the unpre-multiply. And this is the combination, just a simple combination of the elements that we were considering, the main render elements.